The wheel. A perfect function, invented in the Stone Age. To this day, the wheel provides the same function as it did those thousands of years ago. But one man is flipping everything we knew about the wheel on its head.
My name is Michael Berta. I'm not an engineer, but I did what most engineers wish they could. When I was a little kid, I liked to take things apart and see what they're made out of. I tried to make something new out of them. And I still like doing it to this day. In 2012, I was running an HR company and I turned on the movie Tron. I was drinking a coffee and I thought, those are very cool motorcycles in the movie. They're called light cycles and they have these hollow wheels. And I remember thinking, well, I'm not an engineer, but couldn't we do something useful with that empty space? I imagined you could put things in the wheel that lived outside of it with an electric wheel. For example, the motor and the battery. A wheel that powers itself is a much more universal wheel than a wheel that needs something else to power it. Make it super compact, super efficient, and that's really what inspired me. Pretty much everyone said it was impossible. They said that if it could be done, it would have been done already by a real engineer. So I ignored them and I quit my job. And then I met Dakota Decker, who ended up leaving SpaceX to build the wheel together with me. Dakota and I spent about 2 years before we came to the version that we put up for retail. It's a much more compact design. It takes up the same space as a regular wheel, but it's got everything in it, the entire powertrain, the battery, the motor, the computer. This wheel is extremely environmentally friendly. It's electric power, and it's a very efficient use. We have made thousands of bicycles into affordable electric vehicles all over the world. We see that we can contribute to the future of transportation with the geo-orbital wheel. We see vehicles that nobody has ever made before being able to be made now. Imagine a car. Imagine the possibilities when you take all the guts out of a car because you just don't need them anymore. The opportunities really are endless.
Raise your hand if you have ever invented something. So I have an idea. That's not a lot of hands. There's maybe a couple of hundred people in this room, but that's not a lot of hands. I have an idea that I want to run by you. Let's consider that invention is the completion of this sentence. What if I just? Let me explain what I mean. Imagine you're watching a movie about the times of Julius Caesar, and there's warring tribes, and they're trying to kill each other, and they're using swords and shields and catapults and throwing stones at each other. And you look at it and think, why don't they just use guns? Why don't they just use a gun? Or let's say you're reading about the bubonic plague from the 1300s. It devastated Europe. It's one of the greatest catastrophes in human history. Tore families apart. And you're reading about it and you're thinking, why don't they just use antibiotics? Why don't they just? Or think about the last 100 years. Even 100 years ago, the problems we had. And just think to yourself, well, why don't they just use email or satellites or cell phones or 3D printers or any of 1,000 of other inventions that have been around that have changed the world in the last 100 years? Why don't they just? It's a very simple question, but it's a very difficult answer. People ask this question about the big things, but it also applies to the little things. Think back in your life. Think back to this morning. Think back to the last year. Have you ever solved a problem? And when you solved it, you had a moment. You thought for a moment, why don't I just do this? Maybe it was something simple like a different way to make your coffee in the morning. Maybe it's a different way to cross the street because there was construction. Any simple solution to any problem that made you think, why don't I just do this? And when you thought about it, you did it and your problem was solved. Think. Can you remember a time in your life when that has happened? That is an invention. And I'm going to ask the question again. Raise your hand if you've ever invented anything. Okay. Well, now I'm in a room full of inventors. So I can speak with you about invention, and I have an invention that I want to share with you guys. Let's think of the problems that we have in society today. Okay? Let's think of global warming. Why don't I just global warming? Why don't I just urban congestion? How do you fix urban congestion? Cancer. How do you fix cancer? The big questions of today, and there's many, many of them. How do we start answering these questions? For example, urban congestion, why don't I just what? It's a deep question. It's a philosophical question. It's a psychological question. So, before I started making companies, and this is my 4th company, I wanted to be a psychologist. I even have a degree in psychology. So that means 2 basic things. 1, I can charge you money for listening to you talk. 2, I know a lot and mostly useless things about how the human mind works. In psychology, there is this concept of systematic desensitization. Basically, it is the idea that if something scares you or gives you anxiety, by slowly exposing you to things around that and making you comfortable with them, I can make you get rid of your fear. For example, let's say you're afraid of snakes. Okay? So, to get you comfortable with snakes, first I might show you a photograph of a snake and make you comfortable with looking at that photograph. Then I might show you a video of a snake and make you comfortable with looking at that video of a snake. Then I might give you a snake locked in a box, have you hold the box, and make you comfortable with holding that box with a snake. Then I might let the snake on the floor, far from you in a room, and I'll let it crawl around, and I'll make you comfortable with looking at a snake crawling around on the floor, far from you. Then I will let the snake come closer to you, and I'll make you comfortable with that. And a few steps later, you're there holding the snake, and you're petting it, and you're thinking, that is a beautiful snake. That's magic. That's the concept of systematic desensitization. There's another concept in educational psychology called mastery learning. It is the idea that to move on to a more advanced topic in order to really learn something, you have to understand it 100%. So for example, let's say you want to run a mile in 5 minutes. Okay? Before you can run a mile in 5 minutes, you have to really master running a mile in 6 minutes. Your mile in 6 minutes has to be 100%. To run a mile in 6 minutes, you have to be an absolute master of running a mile in 7 minutes. Your 7-minute mile has to be 100%. To get to the 7-minute mile, your 8-minute mile has to be 100%. It makes sense, right? That's how you get better and better and better. Well, that's not how reality works, right? It makes sense to us academically, but in education and in reality, it's not that at all. In reality, it's something I call good enough learning. If you get to 80% understanding, you're considered ready to move on. Think of a test you've taken in school. If you get 80% of the questions right, that's a really good grade. You move on. You learn algebra, now you can go on to calculus. Okay? But let's look at that 80% a different way. Let's say you're building a house, and you pour your foundation until it's 80% ready. Then you put up your frame until it's 80% ready. Then you put up your roof until it's 80% ready. Then you put in your plumbing and your electrical until it's 80% ready. And when 80% of your walls are installed, you and your family move in. Now, what do you think will happen? I'll tell you. You'll get electrocuted, flooded, and the house will fall down on you. 80% is not good enough, right? And the house is far less important than your life view and who you are as a person. So why is it that 100% needs to be for a house, but you can get away with your life with 80%? Weird, right? So that is the concept of mastery learning. Now, since this talk is about invention, I want to share with you what I think we can do with combining these two things. Now, most inventions are just combinations of things anyway. Let's think of the problems of today, the problems that we have now, and how do we solve them? Let's take urban congestion again. Urban congestion, why don't I just? Now, if I put you in a room with that question, right? I take you and I put you in this room and I say, answer this question, you will be afraid of it. It will give you anxiety. It's like a snake. You don't know how to approach it. It's overwhelming. But I can't systematically desensitize you to that question. I can't show you a picture of a question. I can't show you a video of a question. I can't lock you and the question up in a room and make you comfortable with it. So how do we address the questions? So this is the idea, I think, behind mastery learning. To get to the really hard questions, first you have to answer the easy questions. You have to be comfortable with invention. You have to be comfortable with the simple little things that you do every single day and master them. So if you'll allow me, I think we should do a little exercise right now. There's a lot of chairs here, and they don't look very comfortable. I'm sorry, I was just sitting in one for a while. It's not a very comfortable chair. Sorry to the organizers. So let's invent a way to be more comfortable right now in these chairs. Maybe you stand up, maybe you stretch, maybe you sit in a different way. Right now, in front of me, invent a way to be more comfortable. Whatever it is, don't be shy. It can be wrong, it can be right, but do it. And don't just think about it. Thinking about an idea is not mastery of the idea. Do it. Do it until you're 100% there. You're not going to do it now while I'm talking, but do it for the duration of the symposium. Make sure you're comfortable. Invent a way for you to be comfortable and own it and master it. And when you're comfortable with this, when you're comfortable with your ability to do something simple, think of this as looking at that picture of a snake and being comfortable with it. Be comfortable with your idea to create something new. Be comfortable with that first step of creation of invention. And when you're ready, when you feel you've mastered that, go home and fix another problem. And then fix another problem. And then you'll desensitize yourself to the big questions. Then you'll get used to answering them. In the beginning of my talk, you saw a video of a wheel that I invented. I've invented a lot of things, very small things, bigger things. I'm an inventor. We're all inventors. The bicycle that this wheel is designed to go on is the most universal vehicle in the world. There's over 1 billion bicycles on this planet. Almost everybody in the world knows how to ride a bicycle. My answer to urban congestion is, urban congestion, why don't we just make all bicycles electric? So that you can get to work without sweating, without polluting, and you don't take up more space on the road than you need to. I think it's a very simple answer to a very simple question, but the process is a very difficult one. It's not an easy thing to answer. Urban congestion, why don't we just make every bicycle an electric vehicle? That's my answer to this question. It might not be the right answer, it might not be the only answer, but that is the answer for me. So, it's the one takeaway I think I would like to share with you, that the fastest runner in the world needed to learn to walk at some point in his life. Thank you.